great. You were hitting those high notes. Good. Yeah, I'll go ahead and enter us into the time of prayer real quick. God, you don't give yourself to us in pieces. And God, you don't want us to give ourselves to you in pieces either. God, I pray tonight that you come into our life wholly today. That you make yourself whole in a place that we've never seen you before. In a place that we might be scared, we might not know what to do with the situation, we might not know what to do with what we're experiencing, God, but I just ask that we give it to you today. And God, be with us and guide us and keep us and allow ourselves to give ourselves wholly to you. In your holy name we pray. Amen. So, last week, we entered into a little series that I'm going to be starting here over the next couple weeks. Oh, there it is. And so, last week, I started us off with talking about the heart. And I brought up that a lot of times we go into Christianity and we go into life expecting this kind of a faith, you know, this cute little, like good looking, easy to comprehend, easy to get faith. And then once we actually get into it, we realize that it's a whole lot more complicated than we think it is. And it's a whole lot bigger and a lot more detailed than what we ever could have imagined, right? And I said that a lot of times Christianity was the same way, right? We walk into Christianity expecting this kind of commitment, this kind of pressure, this kind of attack from the enemy. But then once we get into it, we realize the enemy's actually attacking us at a level that is so much bigger than what we understand. And so the series is called Wholehearted. You can notice that I misspelled whole for a reason. And that's because a lot of us think that we're walking around with a full heart when actually the hole that we think is whole and full is actually filled with holes. And so in this series, the theme statement that I'm walking us through over these next couple weeks are all of us are born with a God-sized hole or a God-sized hole in our heart that can be filled with anything we let it to make it seem whole. We will learn how to let God fill the holes in our heart to make it truly whole. And then the theme verse, you know, kind of the big picture, this is what I preached on last week. It's Proverbs 27:19. It says, as water reflects a face, so a man's heart reflects the man. And so I preached last week on heartbeat, right? You know, a cute little thing, you know, getting our rhythm into the series, getting our motion, you know, getting acquainted into the series itself. And so the first thing I preached on was patterns. And that's because our life and the way that we operate as people is functioned in patterns. And patterns lead to certain things. They lead to certain outcomes. And the patterns that we establish are controlled by our choices. They're controlled by our decisions. And so our decisions, if we want to establish a new pattern, we have to decide to do something differently. That's how we make that new pattern. And so next I preached on position because the patterns always lead you to a certain position. And then with position I was talking about how there's the position that God sees and that it's really there, you know, like what our heart really is like. And then there's the image that we present to people, right? And we take our heart and we manipulate it, we change it in a whole lot of ways to make it look better than it actually is. And so I said that the gap between what God sees and what people see is our intention, right? Because our intention is getting us from what God sees to now we can present it to people in a certain way that we think is better, right? It's our intention. And then the last thing I talked about was power. And so with power, right, we lose the power when we change our position, right? When we take ourselves out of God's position. And the power that we lose can only be overcome by vulnerability. And so when we are not vulnerable and we are not willing to be vulnerable with ourselves and with other people, then the position of our heart is therefore it is taken out of place of God. And we sacrifice the power that comes along with being in the position that God wants us to be. So that's just a short little recap from last week. And this week, we're going to be talking about a little something different. So I want to start this off by allowing you guys to see where I was back in middle school. Julius got real excited because he knows what's coming. So when I was in middle school, I wanted to be a rapper. Okay?
Oh.
Little sixth grade Mitch. I walked into the school and I listened to like the Black Eyed Peas and Daft Punk and Taylor Swift. and so I really hadn't, gotten into rap a whole lot. Black Eyed Peas, like a little bit, it's more like poppy rap, but once I actually got into middle school, Drake dropped Thank Me Later, which is his first, studio album. And so I watched on Teen Nick, I remember because it came on right after an episode of Drake and Josh. Because I would go home religiously every single day and watch both episodes of Ned's Declassified and both episodes of Drake and Josh. Thank you. And what's great now, right, is Drake and Josh is on Hulu, and I just got that Spotify and Hulu student deal for $5 a month. So I'm about to go back and watch Drake and Josh. But yeah, so after Drake and Josh one day, Drake's song Over, which if you guys haven't heard the song, it's a classic Drake track. Back from 2010, it was like the lead single off of his debut album. And so I heard that song and I fell in love. And then my cousins, I have an older cousin, he's probably 6 years older than me, 6 or 7 years older than me, and I always have looked up to him. I got my love of Jeeps from him. I got like a lot of my personality, I can contribute to him. Attribute to him, not contribute to him. And so him and his younger sister, so my other cousin, they were driving me around one day and they started playing the song Miss Me off of Drake's album. And so I heard the song and I was like, oh, yo, that's really good. Like, who sings that song? And they were like, oh, Drake sings that song. He's this new rapper, just coming out, just dropped his first album. So I was like, okay, cool. I got Over and then I got Miss Me. So then I was just like, I might as well dabble around in some of the rest. So I got deep into rap, right? Drake, and like he's my first love, and he's still my best love. Like I have every single song that this man has released since 2007. Like every mixtape, everything, like all the way up till now, right? Biggest Drake fan you'll probably ever meet. So, long story short, yeah, okay. So that girl in Greensboro and then the girl from Toronto who got Drake tattooed across her forehead. They beat me, okay? They might have got me, but long story short, I got really into rap, and so I wanted to become a rapper, right? So back in middle school, you're gonna get a little glimpse into middle school Mitch here real quick, because I'm gonna take the next couple minutes and I'm gonna read out one of the raps that I wrote. It's one of the first ones that I wrote.
This is the Mitch I knew.
This is it's from 2012, so that's 6 years ago. So I was 12 and a half years old.
Oh my gosh.
So keep that in mind. I no longer write raps and no longer aspire to be a rapper. This was before God called me to become a preacher. And don't worry, there's no bad words in it or anything. All those come a year later. But 2012, I was a clean man. But I'm going to read it to you, okay? And so, look, I got to give you a little bit of context as well. So back in middle school, I had this one friend from African Drum Ensemble. Do you remember Steven?
Yeah.
Okay. So Steven was our producer, right? The man can even now, I listen to the beats that he made, and I was like, bro, those are dope beats, okay? Like he knows how to chop and screw and sample and do all that stuff. Like he's dope, right? And then there was one of my friends named Ryan, right? And so Ryan was just like, yo, I want to start a rap label. And so naturally, the guy who wants to start the rap label, the guy who makes beats, and then me all join together and we formulate in middle school, back in 6th and 7th grade, what we would call RJ records, right? And RJ are the initials of my friend Ryan. And so I'm going to read you one of the first raps that I ever wrote for RJ Records. And now what we would do is my friend would write the beats, make the beats and all that. And I would go home and I would pretty much write like a rap a day. I'm pumping out these things like a song a day. Okay, I'm going home and I'm just typing away, writing what comes to mind, trying to get that, quantity. And the more that you do it, the better you get. So, here it goes. This is a glimpse into past Mitch. Verse 1. I'm the heartbeat of the rap game. Thinking you're playing the game, but you ain't. I'm on the next level. Note to all the ladies, I'm unclaimed. So now I'm sitting on my couch with several. I'm at the top, so you can't understand. I'm here to stay, so you know I won't fall. Down to shame, I'm stuck on this plane, thinking that you're balling in this game, but you're on the bench, keeping it warm. But to be first string, you need to learn something. So go to class. Stop partying in your dorm. I do it so good, you'll be stuck wanting more of what I got. So you keep on stunting. Getting only scared when I'm confronting. You stuttering for words like you scapping. In the club, I'm the only one jazzing. Labels look at my resume and are gladly lining up to sign me, offering me all kinds of money, plans, but I break them, sticking with RJ. Hey, but I'm sorry, but really, what more can I say? But hey, there ain't no space for both of us in this place. So we go in, and when we're done, I can't even recognize his face. Verse 2, no hook. People bring down and say that everything is against me. But really, without competition, where would we be? Looking for a chance to finally be free. But when you get there, it's not exactly what you expected it to be. Nah, it's filled with a lot of hate and greed. But you hope that when you plant your seed, that you'll have unbelievable success and that you'll always be the best. And then no one cares about the rest, looking at you like they're very impressed. Now that you're here, everyone is asking where you're going next. And you haven't even unpacked, but they don't care about that. They just want you to keep going. They don't care where you're at or what you've accomplished. All they want is for you to finally crack. Verse 3, no hook. They wonder what it's like to be in my shoes. So I take right off and give it to you. Sorry, I read that wrong. They wonder what it's like to be in my shoes. So I take it right off and give it to you. And now you're walking right behind me like you're following my footsteps. But I keep walking. Look how far I made it without you. I am THE man, so you can't understand that all this was planned. But sometimes I'm getting stuck like I'm stuffed in a can. Then when I burst, someone's got to cool me off like a fan. Only the haters are ones that sadly can't comprehend my verses and raps, so you have to give them a hand. When I'm working hard, you playing in the sand. So no one now can come up and compare you to me. Not anymore can you ever be compared to me. See, I have a difference in clarity. That is why, sir, I am living in prosperity. That's why you saying you better is unfair to me. I'm a person that no one else would dare to be. But I killed this. I'll make sure to grab a bouquet and visit you at the cemetery. That was middle school Mitch.
Wow. 12-year-old Mitch was deep.
I got bars, okay? They got me stuck like I'm stuffed in a can. You can't top that. Okay? But no, like in all seriousness, I wanted to do that so that you guys could get a glimpse into my heart, right, at that time. And I know it's a little funny, it was a little goofy, but that was a glimpse at myself. You know, that was a glimpse at who I was aspiring to be. It was a glimpse at the way that I wanted myself to be seen. It was a glimpse at the way that that if I would have continued down that path, how I wanted people to see me within that context. You know, it was a glimpse at myself. It was a glimpse at my heart. And let's just say, I'm very glad that I am no longer a rapper. Because if that was my quality, I was going nowhere. Okay? But anyway, today, week 2, wholehearted. Second week of the series. Today I want to be talking about heart problems. So last week was heartbeat. This week is heart problems. And the verses that I'm going to be doing are coming out of Zechariah 7. And Zechariah here is one of the minor prophets. And so he has just gotten a word from God. And he is delivering it to the people. And so that's where we're picking up. It says, "The word of the Lord came to Zechariah, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, render true judgment, show kindness and mercy to one another. Do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, the sojourner, or the poor, and let none of you devise evil against another in your heart." The first thing I want to talk about is proclaim. That's what Zechariah is doing here, proclaiming. He's speaking what God has given him, right? Because a lot of times, and not necessarily in a context like this, but a lot of the times God will bring another person into your life to speak into your situation, right? And that's what Zechariah is doing here. He's being the mouthpiece of God. He's going and proclaiming what God has given to him. And so the first thing I wanted to highlight from what he was talking about was he said, do not oppress the widow, the fatherless, the sojourner, the poor, right? The common trend behind all the groups that he listed is they're already vulnerable, right? So we, as the followers of God, we can be vulnerable ourselves, but we cannot do anything to oppress the people who are already vulnerable, right? The widow does not have a husband. The fatherless, of course, does not have a father. The sojourner does not have knowledge, and the poor does not have money, right? They're vulnerable in some way. And each one of those areas highlights a different aspect of the world that we live in about ways that we can undervalue and underappreciate people, right? And so he's calling to his people here saying, be careful not to do this. He's proclaiming it. He's giving them a warning. He's giving them a heads up. And he's saying, don't do this, right? And so I was really intrigued by the word oppress, right? Because I think that that's such an interesting word for them to use for that group of people, right? And so I was, there's got to be something more about the word oppress. And so when I looked it up, the definitions that I pulled from online were to unjustly exercise authority, right, towards someone in another way that causes someone distress, right? And so what I want us to realize, and this even goes back to last week when I was talking about our decisions, is that everything that we do, everything that we create has a cause. And what I mean by that is that when we make a decision and when we act a certain way and we have a certain mindset towards a person or a group of people, without intentionally doing it, we can oppress them because we're making them feel distressed. That's all oppressing is. It says to cause someone to feel distressed. And when we oppress in that way, we are taking away from what God wants us to do. And so our causes can either cause someone towards distress or can cause someone to lean more on God, right? There's two ways that you can go with this, because you can either create an internal struggle with that person, or you can make that person's internal rely more on God, right? And so the next thing that I really wanted to highlight was when it said, do not plan evil against somebody in your heart. In your heart. And so if you guys can remember back to last week, if you were here, I talked about how one of the definitions from the Greek specifically for the word heart that was in Proverbs 27:19 was that the heart is the seed of thought. So when this passage here is speaking on, do not think evil of anyone in your heart. Do not devise evil of anybody in your heart. When you sit there, you have to be careful of what you let speak in your heart, what you let sneak in your heart, and what you let stay in your heart, right? What you let come out of your heart, what you let come into your heart, and what you let at your heart, right? You have to be cautious of the things that are there. And really when I was reading this, it was almost like I got a reminder of something that, God brought it to my mind, because it seems like they were almost taking a step up, right? Because you've heard it said, don't commit evil against one another. But Zechariah here is saying, but truly I tell you, do not devise evil against somebody in your heart. And so, Jesus had a very similar passage to this, in Matthew, Sermon on the Mount, where he goes through and he says 5 different statements. I've got 3 of them here, right? And so he said, you've heard it said, do not commit murder. But truly I tell you, don't even be angry with your brother or give an insult to him, right? Another one is, you've heard it said, do not commit adultery. Truly I tell you, do not look lustfully at a woman, because then you've already sinned with her in your heart. And then the last one that I'm bringing up here is, you've heard, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemy and pray for your enemy, right? It's taking a step up. It's no longer just don't do evil against another person. It's don't think evil in your heart, because that's taking it to another level that our heart isn't designed to handle, right? When we allow those thoughts in, we're creating an internal struggle that's not supposed to be there, right? So even 2 weeks ago when I was preaching on death by division, I was saying that when Satan comes in, he always tries to divide God's kingdom. And he does that by causing doubt, right? Because we learned that doubt only comes from being able to have more than one option, right? And so now you're struggling between 2 different options, and you're struggling beside which one to pick, and you don't know what to do. And so now you've led yourself to a place of division because of a struggle that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place, right? And so when we let the enemy in, a divided kingdom cannot stand. That's what that verse said that I was preaching on in death by division in Luke 7. Yes, either 7 or 11. 7-11 is good. It's got my mind all mixed up. But a divided kingdom cannot stand. And so when we allow evil thoughts to be devised in our heart, those evil thoughts aren't coming from God, so therefore we've caused a division, and we've caused a crack, and we've caused a hole to be formed in our heart, right? We're vulnerable. And the enemy, right, because the enemy is the one who brings those thoughts into our heart, the only way that he can get into our heart is through the holes that are there, that we aren't protecting. If the enemy comes in and sees that everything is protected by God, then he'll have nowhere to come in, because God is stronger than the enemy. So if we've already given everything to the enemy or to God, then the enemy will have no way to enter into our heart. But when we get these evil thoughts and when we get these fleshly thoughts, it's because we haven't, and we really aren't able to truly understand the complexity that it takes to fully give ourselves to God. I try to live in a way that shows myself as dependent on God, that shows myself reliant on God, but it is so much bigger than what I think it is. And so when I say that I have given myself fully to God, there's a limitation to that, because there's a limitation of how much we can give ourselves to God as people. And so what we have to understand is that because there is a difference between us and God, and because we cannot understand things and give things on the same level that God can, there's always a division between us. And so there's always going to be space for the enemy to attack us. And there's always going to be another place that we have to worry about the enemy getting into our hearts. There's always going to be another way that we have to protect the enemy from getting into our mind. And there's always going to be another problem that comes up. And even once you deal with the one now, then it's just going to sprout up in a different way. And then now it's going to come back in a different place. And now you look like those little cartoon characters just plugging holes, waiting for the dam not to break. Right? We have to realize that no matter how much we give ourselves to God, there's still a division. So there's still room for the enemy, which means that we have to give ourselves to God in a way that realizes that and that accepts that the only way to fill that gap is through God. And so that's the way that the enemy can sneak in. And that's the way that he sneaks in my mind. When I allow him to come in through the things that I'm struggling with, and when I allow him to come into the things that I'm dealing with right now, that's how the enemy can get in, and then it's pervasive. Then it's going in. I had a really bad week last week. Really bad. I let Satan get into some areas of my life, and it affected my mental health, it affected my relationships, it affected my homework. I got nothing done, right? And it's because I let Satan in just a little bit, and then he just, once it's in, it's a lot harder to get rid of, right? And so we also have to understand that we're smarter than sometimes we give ourselves credit to, right? Like, if we know that Satan is at the door, we're not going to answer it. And so Satan does a really good job at disguising himself. I think that Satan is one of the best people at disguising themselves to make them look like something that they're really not. To make it look like, oh yeah, oh I remember her, yeah, she's cool, she's all right, she's good, don't worry about it. Oh yeah, oh we were friends back in the day, we had a lot of fun, oh man, I remember him from middle school, that's great. And then, we have these things that seem so great, but then when we realize and we let them back in, oh, that's not exactly what I thought it would be, right? And so when we let these areas into our heart and we allow them to be vulnerable, it's not always the easiest to tell what we're letting in. Because sometimes Satan does a really good job at making himself look like God. Like a really good job at making himself look like God. And the only way, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, the only way that we can really know the difference is a distinction, right? And it's not necessarily a distinction of what the item or what the struggle or what the person or whatever's coming into our life. It's not necessarily the surface level, but there's a distinction that we have to make. And so the next thing that I want to highlight, I'm going to move a little bit forward in the text. And so Zechariah 11, this is after the proclamation. This is after Zechariah has warned the people. And then it says, but they refused to pay attention. I think that's funny considering, this whole entire weekend at church was about the gate of attention, and turn a stubborn shoulder and stop their ears that they might not hear. They made their hearts diamond hard, lest they should hear the law and the words that the Lord of hosts had sent by his Spirit through the former prophets. The next thing I want to talk about is problem. Because we got a problem now. We got a problem. As we can see in this text, the people who Zechariah was proclaiming to, they refused God. They made their hearts. That is all a decision. They made their hearts. If there is one thing that God has been teaching me over anything else over the past 6 months of my life, it is the power of choice. The power of choice. And it is ridiculous how much power comes in the everyday choices that we make. They made their hearts. And here in the text it talks about 3 different areas that they cut off from God, right? It says that they stopped their ears, that they turned a stubborn shoulder. I thought that was a funny way to describe it. So stop their ears, turned a stubborn shoulder, and they turned their eyes away from God as well. And so I think that that's interesting because when you think about it, we have our five senses. We have taste, smell, touch, to talk, and then to see, right? And so you can't really, at least I've never smelled God. I don't know what God smells like. Never really tasted God. Chicken wings are close, but I've never really tasted God. And so you take that away, right? And so now you're left with sight, speech, and touch. And in the text, we realize that they've taken away their sight, they've taken away their sound, and they've turned themselves away from God. And so the only thing that's left is for God to physically touch them. That is the only way that God can get to them now, because they've cut themselves off from every other way that God can reach them. We as people are limited, and I know that there's more than the five senses, but those are the basic five that we all know. You got the little dust particles in your ear that allow you to know which way's up and all those crazy senses, right? But those are the main five. And so that is the way that I've seen God communicate with me, right? Because our eyes give us our perspective, the way that we're facing gives us a direction, and then our ears allows us to hear and adjust along the way, right? That's the way that I've seen my walk with God carry out. And so when you cut off these three things, you've left God no other option because it's all in your choice. They made their hearts. It's all in your choice to cut those things off, right? And so, but really, it makes me wonder, why would they do this, right? They got this warning from Zechariah, so they knew it was coming, and they knew what they shouldn't do, and they knew, what was coming their way, and they still did it. But the enemy is so good at making himself look like God. Oh, he is so good at making himself look like God. Because I don't think that these people would straight up deny the voice of God if they knew that it was the voice of God. I think that they had God in their hearts and that they were well-intentioned and good people. And I don't even necessarily think that it was a big, suck it to God to cover their ears and close their eyes and turn their body away from him. I don't think that that was their intention. But instead, they turned themselves away and left themselves vulnerable to something else that they thought was what they were supposed to be doing in the first place. Right? They thought that God was in the way that they were looking. When actually God was saying, hey, I'm over here, but as much as he calls out and as much as he cries out, he can't get to us because they stopped their ears. And so when we have these things, right, and I think it's really important that he talked about the sight and the ears and the direction of their body, because it takes all three of those things working together to establish a purpose, right? You need to have a direction that your body is facing. You need to have a perspective of both where God is and where you're going. And you also need to be willing to hear from God and be willing to adjust your track. That's how you get a purpose, right? Is the combination of those three things. And so when you cut those three things off from God, they're in a different source, because it's not like you lose all of your purpose and all of your dreams like that. And so now you have a different input, right? And so now you have more than one choice to choose from, because you have the voice of God and the voice of the enemy. And so when you cut those things off to God, the only voice left that's there to speak into your life is the enemy. And so you mistake the enemy for what's God, and now you're going off and changing your degree and doing all this stuff because you think that it's God, but it might not be God. I don't know. It could be God. I don't know whose voice you're listening to, right? I made the good decision of not becoming a rapper, and I knew that was God. Right? Not necessarily because it was a rapper to a preacher, because I think that a lot of rappers need to take a step closer to God. And I think that the rappers who are in there can take a step up skill-wise a little bit, but they're doing it for the right reason. They're reaching the right people. So it's not necessarily I knew that it was God because I went from a rapper to a preacher, because I still could have done very godly things as a rapper. However, it's not where God was calling me. It's what I wanted to do. Even after I became a preacher for a little while, I was like, yo, I think it would be dope to like go to church on Sunday, but then like be performing on Saturday nights and like light up the crowd, and you're like, hey, it's your boy King David, like, hey, you know, right? And so, you know, I felt and I feel, even still, if I wanted to drop a mixtape, boy, that junk would be fire, right? But it's not my purpose. Because my eyes and my body and my ears are tuned into something else. And so it takes the three of those things working together in order to form that purpose. And so when it was talking about diamond hard, right, they made their hearts diamond hard, I was just like, oh, that's awesome imagery, right? Because we think about diamond, and it's the hardest natural substance on this earth. And the only thing that can cut diamond is diamond, right? There's nothing naturally stronger than a diamond. And so therefore, it takes something outside of you, because there's nothing you can do about a diamond. Like, maybe a little diamond that you get on your ring, and you know, you could like really try, and you know, you can like wiggle it out of place, but even then, that's not the diamond breaking. That's the other material breaking. That's the gold bending and stuff like that. Like, nothing's happening to the diamond itself, and there's nothing you can do about that. It takes something stronger than the diamond in order to get rid of it, in order to go in and fix it. And so then we wonder why sometimes the enemy sneaks into our hearts, and then now we have all these problems that we're dealing with, and we're wondering why they're so hard to get rid of, and that's because it takes something bigger than you to get rid of it. It takes something stronger than the thing that you're facing in order to get rid of it. It takes something stronger than the diamond that's there in order to get rid of it. And so when we allow these diamonds into our heart, I think that we've put diamonds in our heart to make ourselves look better. You know, we cover up the holes with diamonds because then we're just like, oh, look, I'm such a nice person. I'm such a loving person. I'm so easy to get along with. All I'm going to do is compliment you to your face. You know, you make yourself look good. And now you're just saying, look at my heart. It's covered in diamonds. Look at how pretty my heart is. Isn't it great? All those, I don't have any holes in my heart. Look at that. It's diamond studded. I've got a bedazzled heart. Look at this. Right? And so we replace the holes in our heart with these diamonds. But the diamonds are always from the enemy. Or else you wouldn't have to make your heart that way. If they were from God, you'd have a diamond heart. But because they made their hearts, it wasn't something that was there to begin with. So the diamonds are something that you introduce into yourself. It's something that the enemy, because diamonds are made out of pressure. And so whether that pressure is coming from you, whether it's coming from another voice, whether it's coming from the voice of the people down the street, or you know, your mom or your parents, and I want you to be a doctor, and I want you to be a lawyer, and art isn't a real degree, and you know, all this, religious studies isn't a real degree. Oh, you gotta have a backup plan. The pressure forms diamonds. Pressure forms diamonds. So whether that voice is coming from the enemy, whether it's coming from ourselves, whether it's coming from other people, we put a diamond in the place that we're most uncomfortable with because we want it to look like something that it's not. And that sounds a lot like intention. Because we have to realize that when we allow intention into our hearts, it always leaves us in tension. Because when we allow those diamonds to be put in place, the intention of what we want to present creates a tension within our hearts, creates a division, creates a divide, creates a gap within our hearts. And now because we put the diamond there, now it wants a little bit more room, and so now we got to make it a little bit bigger. Well, you got to keep replacing the diamond. You got to keep making the diamond bigger. Oh, you just toss a couple more in there. You know, the bigger my heart, the bigger, and then you get this. That's a good looking heart. Look at my heart. It's so pretty. Look at the way that it shimmers. Look at the way that it shines bright like a diamond. You know? It looks good. That's a good looking heart. That's a good looking heart. I gotta say, right? That's what we all aspire to be. Something that's so hard, nothing can break it. Something that's so hard, nothing can touch it. But that's what we make it. That's not how God made it. They made their hearts diamond hard. Not God made their hearts diamond hard. They did. It's not a form of protection. The diamond isn't really protecting you from anything. Actually, it's inviting a battle into your heart that wasn't there to begin with, because now you're introducing something and a mindset and a thought that wasn't there and wasn't planned, and so now you're leaving yourself exposed to the things that you brought in, and now the enemy's got it. The heart. Moving on a little bit. Zechariah 12b, part 2. Verse 12, part 2. Therefore, great anger came from the Lord of hosts. After these people had refused, great anger came from the Lord of hosts. And we have to realize that every choice that we make has a result. There's a cause, there's an effect. There's the plan, and there's the outcome. And when we make a choice, it always leads to something. As I called, this is supposed to be God speaking here. As I called, and they would not hear, so they called, and I would not hear, says the Lord of hosts. And I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations that they had not known. Thus the land they left was desolate, so that no one went to and fro, and the pleasant land was made desolate. Last thing I want to talk about is product. Because with every pattern that we have, there's a product that comes out. You're producing something. And so, when this passage, right, when it says, like, when God's speaking, he says, when I called out to them, and they did not hear, so they called out to me, and I do not hear. That's a pattern. Because God calls out to us, and then it's our choice to make a pattern. We can either listen to what God is speaking, or we can refuse to listen to what God is speaking. That's a pattern that's established by us, because God is always speaking. The question is, are you listening? And so, when God speaks, and we don't listen, when we speak, we don't know what God has spoke, right? And so when he says, so I do not listen, or I do not hear, right? I'm pretty sure the verse says here, so I do not hear them. We have to understand that there's a difference between listening and hearing. Because God will listen, but he ain't hearing it. Because when he speaks to us and we refuse to listen, and we refuse to hear him, then when we speak to him, we don't understand the context of what he wants us to go towards anyway, and so then we can try and make deals with God, and we can say, oh, well, God, if you did do this, then I'll do that, and then if you make this happen, then I can make that happen, and then I want you to do this here, and I want this thing, and I want this sign, and I want to do this, and I want that, and it all goes out of order, and so now God is just like, oh, I'm not here. I'm not having it. And so it's not that he's not listening, it's just now you don't know what to ask for in order for God to do what he wants you to do anyway. Because praying is a conversation. And so when God speaks and we respond, that is prayer. Prayer is not a monologue. You know, I was talking about this in my e-group on Monday. Prayer is not a monologue. It's not us venting to God. It's not us solely speaking to God. That's one half of it. The other half of prayer is God speaking back. And a lot of the times, and what this verse is telling us, is that God speaks first, and then we speak back. Because he speaks, we listen, we hear, then we speak back. That's that function, that's that pattern of prayer. And so when it says that God scattered them, remember that earlier in the passage, they cut themselves off to every other sense except touch. So they left themselves in a place where now God can only get to them by moving them. Because they are walking and pursuing something that isn't God. And so now the only thing that God can do to snap them out of it is to take them out of it. So when they get scattered, it's a result of and a product of their decision. And so we have to realize, because it says like he scattered them into all the places that they didn't know, and the place that they left was desolate, and nobody else was there. So we have to realize that God can isolate us just like Satan can isolate us. But then that has me thinking, because Satan's really, really good at disguising himself. So Satan, a lot of times, is going to do the same things that God is going to do. The only difference is, what direction does it point you? Because Satan can do a really good job of making himself look like God. And sometimes we mistake the things of God for the things of Satan because it sets us on a whirlwind and leaves us in a space in our mind where we're like, I don't know where I'm at, and oh my gosh, what's happening? It seems like my car just broke down, and then I have to go take it to the shop, and then when I took it to the shop, it cost way too much money, and now I got the insurance on me, and I don't know what to do, and now my mom has called me saying that I've got something else that I got to take care of, and then my roommate called me, and then something broke down in the apartment, and so now you got all these things flooding in, and it's so hard to distinguish what's God and what's not. And Satan does a really good job at making himself look like God. A really good job. And so then he can go in and do the exact same things that God is doing, and will say, "Ha! I got you." Because now Satan's got you to turn a different way, because a lot of the times it's doing the same things that God is doing, and you don't really notice a lot of the times when you're so vulnerable from all these other things that you've put in yourself and that you've allowed to come in, that you are experiencing, whether it's your fault or not, and now you're so vulnerable that you're just being led in a direction because you think that it's the right thing to do, and you think it looks good, and the diamond's really cool, and it's really great, and then you realize, and you block yourself out from God, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to let the voice of the enemy get into me today, I'm not going to let the voice of the enemy get into me, and then you end up blocking out the voice of God, because God and Satan do a lot of the same things, but the only difference is the direction that it points you in. Sometimes it's really hard to establish and know that direction. And the only way that we can keep a constant knowledge of that direction is to stay in a constant conversation with God. Because then when something else comes into our life, then we can realize, oh, that looks like God on the surface, but it's not. And it's only through that pattern of the conversation that we can distinguish and realize the difference. Because God and Satan will do a lot of the same things. A lot of the same things. So that's it. I'm done for today. So I'm going to close this in prayer here.